Aloha. Welcome to Island Time from the Sharpest College Football Podcast. I am BuckMetrics. I am joined as usual by Steponaduck and my co-host of the usual Sharpest College Football Podcast, Robert Martin. Gentlemen, good to see you both. We are starting a new week. Been a rough couple of weeks for my plays, so time for me to get right. Doug, how have you done since we last saw you?
Yeah, I had a great week last week. Went 5-0 in FCS and hit about 63% of my FBS plays. And it's just a real interesting point in the season, right? Some teams are starting to pack it in and really focus on next year. We've got people transferring out, including Thomas Castellanos from Boston College, which was a big one today. He left the team. Conference races are really shaping up in the two conference previews that we did together, shaping up in a fashion that we thought. So that was good insight by us way back in July, which I'm happy about. And yeah, it goes way too quick. We're already in week 12 and it'll be gone before you know it. Let's cherish the last couple of weeks here and keep our nose down and get to work, really.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about Western Michigan. Sorry, sorry to cut you off there. I lost your signal there. About the MAC, Western Michigan's promising, but I don't know if they have the heft. That defense is, boy, it's something. I'll just say that. It's not something great either.
Yeah, they're really up against it on that with that defense. Can't get a lot of stops and can't get off the field on third down. And the last couple of weeks, they've really kind of exposed what they are.
Yeah, yeah. And Robert, I think Robert caught a bug in his undisclosed tropical location that we hit him at last week. But welcome back, Robert. Good to have you. Good to see you on Monday. And now you're fighting a little bit today.
A little bit. I think my voice is just a little off, but I think that with my job specifically, when there was so much work there with all the elections and now that it's done, your body kind of shuts down a little bit. So I think that's the issue. But no, all right, I'm good. I'm here. I was off last week from this. I'm back here this week. Let's rally and let's talk some island games.
I didn't know there was an election last week. I just caught the Miami game in the college football playoff rankings. Forgot there was an election. But he said sarcastically. With that, all right. One game that I want to go over first. This is where Robert and our models were on opposite sides of the line here. So Memphis giving 14.5 to UAB. I actually had this with a 7-point margin with UAB as a play. Robert didn't quite have this as a play. Basically, he had 5-point margin, but interesting that we were on opposite sides here. Grab my laser pointer here. Bear with me for 1 second as I get up to speed here. I've got Robert's model outputs here. It's got UAB with a 104 apex. Might be a little generous. This is not a great passing game, although it's been hot and cold, so maybe this is a hot game. Memphis, as I've been saying for a while, is not a great defense, so maybe this is one where UAB can succeed. The running game for UAB seems right based on basically their offensive performance and Memphis's. I think this is where we differ a little bit. Robert's just got a standout performance here by the Memphis passing game and the running game both. Hennigan would have to go just in a totally different kind of dimension than we've seen from him this year. And this running game is just equally just crazy. Now, UAB is really bad in run defense too, so the opportunity is there. And we've seen sometimes you just get somebody that's very obliging, as we were talking about before the podcast, for example, in Eastern Michigan, they can just let them go and go. My model here with UAB, but they, like I said, that offense is hot and cold. As a team, they run hot and cold. It seems like the offense has come around lately, although as a season-long metrics guy, I shouldn't be too concerned about that. This isn't very encouraging, but guess what's also not encouraging? Memphis is right there in terms of bad defense, and Memphis is basically an average FBS offense too. So I'm not playing this because I'm not going against the dual model, but I do, if I have to choose one of these, I still think that UAB covers, especially if this is still on the proper side of 14 here with the 14.5. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I think I don't love UAB here. I think this is a little too small a margin for me to make it a play. Only about a 5 point off of the 14.5. So it's a little too small. I think Seth Hennigan has definitely not been very impressive this year. And I think, again, UAB definitely not a titan of defense in any way. I think I'd be a little worried about playing UAB on that. Again, at some point you expect them to have a kind of a breakout game there. Again, they're not a good team, but as my model is saying, they might be a little bit better than expected, especially when you look at UAB's defensive G gap. That's a pretty poor defensive G gap. If Memphis is able to run the ball out, then at that point, then that 14.5 is pretty difficult to cover. It's tough to get that within the two scores.
Yeah, you make a good point there. And one thing I didn't mention is one of those kind of things I look at here. It's not explicit, but if I take the offenses versus defenses G gap, we do have a nice physical team here in Memphis, and we have whatever the opposite of that would be with UAB. I don't know. Which side do you think is the play here, if there is one in this one?
Let's just assess where both teams are at. So, UAB, we've been waiting and expecting them to quit after they lost 71-20 against Tulane and then got steamrolled by Army. You thought the team was going to quit. There was some rumblings in the locker room and with the administration around Trent Dilfer, but the team has done everything but that. They've played really competitive football the last 3 times out. They had a double digit lead in the second half against South Florida, and they had a 20-3 lead against Connecticut. A really tough, strong 7-win Connecticut team, I might add. And their first game in November, they played Tulsa and they were up 45-0 at half. So this team has done anything but quit. And Jalen Kitna at quarterback has actually played really well and has rejuvenated the UAB offense. The defense is still Swiss cheese, and they have faded in the second half at times this year. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have covered quite a few Memphis games together on
Well,
Island Time, ironically enough. We got home with the Rice team total under last week, which was nice. And Memphis had some really solid, dominating performances early in the season against Troy, Florida State, Middle Tennessee, and South Florida. And then they took a step back against North Texas. Now, we have been waiting for that physical Memphis defense and the front seven specifically to take over, and they just have not, right? They allowed a ton of they've allowed a ton of yards the last several weeks. Couldn't put Charlotte away. Could barely put Rice away. Got really manhandled by UTSA. It's just been one of those situations where this team has been sleepwalking through many of these games, particularly the first half. They had a slim lead against Rice. They were tied with UTSA, tied with Charlotte, down at the half against North Texas. They just have not been coming out firing on all cylinders. Now, a couple things I like in this game. This is a lesser known rivalry. This is the Battle of the Bones. Now, it might be one of those rivalries where UAB thinks it's a rivalry and Memphis doesn't, and the trophy stays with UAB no matter what happens. It could be one of those, but they do play for the Battle of the Bones. I like the fact that UAB has not quit on the season, and I like where they've been at in the first half of their games this year. So I think you can get a first half line on UAB at probably plus 9.5 or so. And I would look that route. If you just look at a couple of the most recent performances with UAB, again, they led Connecticut 20-3 at half. They led Tulsa 45-0 at half. And they led South Florida 7-9 at half, with significant yardage gains in the first half in each of those games. And then Memphis has shown a tendency in their last four to sleepwalk through the first half. So I would play UAB plus 8.5 or plus 9.5 in the first half of this game. And then it's likely in the second half that UAB's defense would fatigue and give up a ton of yards as they've been prone to do. Um, Another first half play that they played really well and really the full game, but they went to Arkansas and they were tied at the half with Arkansas too. So they've actually performed quite well in the first half of games this year before the defense caves. So the real question for UAB in the full game is how do they get off the mat after blowing that game against Connecticut? They really need to figure that out, and that'll be a tough situation here. Neither one of these teams is playing for much, though. Memphis can't win the conference, and UAB can't go to a bowl game. So it's really one of those where you have to find the underlying motivators. But based on what I've seen from these teams in the last 3 or 4 weeks and where they've been at halftime in these games, I would be inclined to lean UAB's way for the first half. And if I had to make a play on the full game, I would also lean UAB, but it would not be a strong position.
yeah, interesting. I find it just hard to believe that Memphis is 8-2. It doesn't line up with these metrics here. I haven't run my luck metrics for a long time. I would imagine that they're one of the luckier teams this season. Just basically looking at what the record should be versus what their record is. I just didn't. I actually mentioned in our Week 11 review that they actually had a post game win expectancy per my metrics of 33% against lowly Rice, which is troubling. Now, they did score a ton of points against North Texas, which everybody except Army somehow does. How you just basically just say it's basically before the defense caves for UAB, just like it's inevitable. It's just a matter of when. When you mentioned UAB getting steamrolled by Army and Tulane, Army is undefeated, and Tulane, their only two losses are to Power Four teams, and since that loss at Oklahoma, they've just been on a ridiculous tear too. So maybe a little bit of a Hawaii kind of element there, where their really bad losses aren't that bad. I think we hit on that last, or no, it was somebody else. Also, didn't know that was the Battle of the Bones. I'm scared to Google it just to see what that might do to my search history, but with that, we'll go on to the next game. So that's the one where kind of a split decision all the way around where the models disagree here. So now this is one where the models agree on the under here. We both have this as about definitely a one-score game, about a field goal game. Just the Roberts model and my model are on different sides, but this is one of the big games of the week, so I wanted to talk about this. I guess the first thing is, do either of you just know what's the status on Nico for this game? Does anybody know?
I've heard different things. Some have said, I've heard some people say he's got a concussion, he's going to be out, but apparently the head coach is pretty optimistic, and the Tennessee reporters themselves are pretty optimistic he's playing. So that's all I know.
Yeah, that makes this completely different. Anything to add to that, Duck, that you know about Nico? Or
I'm going to pull up my wire reports right now. I hadn't heard any confirmation either way, but Deshaun Bishop will miss a game. He's one of the running backs, but I don't see anything other than he's listed as questionable in concussion protocol. So questionable.
okay. Obviously, that's a big factor here. This is it's almost like a recurring theme between this and the preview pods. Just the market is so slow on Georgia still. Roberts actually, his model has Tennessee winning. I've got Georgia by about a field goal here by the very common football score of 22-18. If I look more deeper on this, I see basically Tennessee, and the eyeballs line up with basically with the metrics here. Tennessee with a much better offense in both passing and running. Sure, Georgia's a little more explosive. Tennessee is not, surprisingly. Tennessee just doesn't. They don't play as basically the hyper reputation lines up with, and that's fine. I've got a better pass defense and a better run defense here for Tennessee. The only elite unit on the field here is Tennessee's defense. This is just some kind of weird perfect storm of the market. I think is still overrating Georgia, and the market just doesn't understand exactly what Tennessee's strengths and style of play are. Not enough margin here to make this a play. I wanted to stray from the gospel here and just go with some I think plays. This would definitely be I think play. I would really look at Tennessee here. And I'm thinking, since you have your model as Tennessee, I don't have to convince you too hard here. Right, Robert?
No, I actually do Tennessee in this spot a little bit. Obviously, that's dependent on if Nico is playing. The thing is, again, I think we talked about it on the podcast. We did not think Georgia was nearly as good as people gave them credit for. And then also an extension of that is that when we say that, we're then also saying, hey, I don't think Texas is as good as people are giving them credit for either. So that's the extension of that. But again, I think Tennessee is a little bit underappreciated due to their loss to Arkansas, but that's their only loss really. They beat a Bama team that we think is pretty good. Yeah, I think this Tennessee team is pretty good. I'm assuming that the 9.5 we see is a good deal of it's because again, if you're pricing in Nico at 50-50 to play, then that's where that is, right? Because if not, then a 4.5 would make a lot of sense. But then if he's not playing at 10 would make a lot of sense, right? Or even more potentially, right? I feel like they're pricing in the 9.5 is like a middle point between where they want to put the spread and a 4.5 spread where our models say this game makes a lot more sense than it would be with a 9.5. Again, if he plays, I love Tennessee here. I think the line will definitely come down if he's playing, probably down closer to at least a 6.5. I don't think you're gonna get a full score in a pit for if he's playing. But again, I don't think this is the best Georgia team we've seen in several years. I don't think they're one of the best teams. I'm taking Tennessee here and the under two. I do the under two, but Tennessee, yeah.
Yeah, Doc, I can throw it to you thusly. The one thing I would say that would go in favor of Georgia, and these were just games that kind of got out of control in one way or another. Georgia faced what I have as elite defenses in Texas and Alabama, and they scored 30 and 34 in those two games. So they've shown up oddly in some of these weird spots. But again, if you watch both those games, those were hardly typical, and still for long periods of time, Carson Beck stunk there. So I guess just to start you on this one, do you think that how do I frame this? Do you think the market still has more unfounded faith in the Georgia offense than is merited?
Yeah, probably. I think that it's really interesting to see Carson Beck regress this year. He's got many more turnover worthy throws than we've typically become accustomed to seeing. The decision making has been just a struggle. They clearly miss Bowers at the tight end position, who was just such a safety valve for them and a pressure relief valve. And so there's been a lot of growing pains from this team on offense this season. Georgia's defense is still elite. And I think we're overlooking the fact that Mississippi might be really good, right? I think Ole Miss might just be really good. And we're severely underrating the Ole Miss front seven, which just created so much havoc for Georgia in a tough road environment. Now, there's a couple of other things to think about. The TV show last night for the college football playoff positioning had Georgia as the first team out. I don't think they'll need much more motivation than that to go through the remaining couple of games in their schedule and just steamroll all of their opponents to prove that they deserve to be in. That'll be all the motivation Kirby Smart needs. We have two teams with a similar complexion that faced off last year, and Tennessee beat them 38-10. I have a suspicion that this game is going to look a lot like the Texas game where people are down on Georgia. I know they're favored in the contest, but people are still doubting what this team can be. It will take an elite performance and it'll take a much better play from the quarterback position, but I could see Georgia really coming out at home and just flexing on Tennessee in this game, whether Nico plays or not. Tennessee, you could argue, outside of Alabama, has had one of the weaker SEC schedules this year with Oklahoma, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. I'm not super impressed with all of what I've seen from the opponents that Tennessee has played, and they find themselves in a ton of low scoring, close games. The game could be close. I would be inclined to take Georgia against the number, but I really like the under here as well. Now, the under has ticked down. It's 48 and a half. So if you haven't made a play, I would make your play before it goes to 46 and a half. I think that you'll find laser focus from the Georgia defense. They should be locked in. I think they'll get in the backfield. I think this will just be a spot where Tennessee, who at times has struggled to move the ball, they didn't struggle against Kentucky or Mississippi State, but they have struggled a little bit against Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Florida. So there is a little bit of chink in the offense. I think people are still also assessing the wow factor from what Tennessee has done in their first three games of the season, but the offense isn't maybe as good as what everybody might have thought in the preseason. I think this will be a defensive battle like the last couple of games between Georgia and Tennessee have been. I would suspect that it's lower scoring. Both of these red zone defenses are elite, so you should see plenty of field goal attempts, or if teams go for it on fourth down inside the 20, likely to get stopped. But this is just one of those where if Georgia is a playoff contender and a national championship contender, as they have been for 5 years, this is a game they need to win convincingly. Could be 27-10 or something of that nature. So I would lean on Georgia against the number, but I like the under in this matchup.
Yeah, 2 points about what you said. I just don't know if the motivation is enough. I These numbers are super super ordinary on the Georgia offense against what's a very stiff Tennessee defense here. Very good point. I hadn't realized just the really weak conference slate that Tennessee has. So this is a different. I want to say this is a different kind of animal, but not on the offensive side of the ball. These don't look unlike Arkansas or a Mississippi State. Just wondering if this can be like last season. Carson Beck is not like last season. I think just we can't get past that. The long sample size here about just the interception fetish the guy seems to have. It's no bueno. I don't know if his confidence is shot. It looks like that to me. But I guess the other thing too, just one other question for you then, Doug. If you do the under here, isn't 9.5 a lot to give?
It can be, but it's like those other Georgia games where they've played in the week one openers the last couple of years where it's 48-point total and they're laying 19 or 17 when they face Clemson and Oregon and teams like that, and it's 45-3 or 34-10 or 34-3. So I'm not necessarily assuming that the low total scares me off from laying the number. It just would lead me to believe that Tennessee is likely to not score more than 17 in this game.
Yeah, and I guess I can't see a path for Georgia to do that. Just I've got a shaky quarterback against this is an elite pass defense, and you don't have a running game that would be able to run bail them out. Usually now they're going against this is an elite run defense. So interesting discussion here. This is definitely what now. Of course, I'm unprepared. Is this the in my neck of the woods the 12:30 or is this the 5 or 4:30 game on? I'm guessing on ESPN. I can let me see.
I'll
It's a
pull it up real
4:30
quick.
my time. Yeah, yeah, it's a prime
7:30
time game.
Eastern.
Yeah. Don't know what I don't know if Georgia's one of those places like LSU or Blacksburg or Penn State where the night games really are that much more fearsome than the day games. Don't really get a ton of. It seems like Georgia usually plays in the earlier time slots, doesn't it? For whatever reason.
Yeah, usually the
Yeah.
3:30 for years it was 3:30 on CBS or 12 noon on ESPN.
Yeah. So this will be interesting. I don't really have a good feel for how these games feel, if you will. So all right, one to watch in that primetime window. This is going to be weird. I said from before the season that this game really concerned me as a USC guy. And now we've got Nebraska who just cannot get out of their own way offensively, but still have a good, not great defense here. Going against a USC team that is making a change at quarterback. I want to talk about that for a moment here, and that there are like 17 different points. I'm going to boil it down to the most salient, like half dozen. So I did some looking back. Miller Moss has by far the worst apex of any Lincoln Riley quarterback ever. He's definitely the least mobile too. I think when you couple those two with USC, I guess if you want to be very generous and say they're still adjusting to pass blocking in the Big Ten. They've had challenges to extreme challenges in extended periods of time in Big Ten games in terms of pass blocking. You've got then Mayava coming in, who is much more mobile. Basically, probably is I guess, a proof of concept for any kind of recruits who might have been wavering with USC being 4-5. If you basically can point to the shiny new object named Jaden Mayava, maybe you can say, "Hey, look, everything's great. We've now we're settled at quarterback." I don't know if I'm as optimistic about both of our models here. I've got it a 13-point game. Robert's model has it an 18-point game. I guess if there's one thing that makes me really optimistic, it is the matchup of just the really poor offense of Nebraska against. This is the kind of offense where USC's defense can get right. They struggle with the punch you in the mouth offenses, and I don't think there's a lot of punching in the mouth going on from this Nebraska offense. Robert's model has it the same way with Nebraska not really running that well. He's got, and this is just how your model works. If you have Miller Moss throwing for 161, who knows what that means for Jaden Mayava? Maybe that's 80, maybe that's 180. Who knows? We talked about in a couple of the lookbacks that we've done. The new quarterback is a complete wild card. Now, this is a new quarterback who actually was. I don't know if no, he wasn't the I think it was a freshman of the year in Mountain West, was not the offensive player of the year, but had an amazing season at UNLV. My model, for whatever it's worth, has been very good on USC. Don't know if I want to, I think it's moved up to 9 or 9.5 now. I'll just take a win, not really recommending a play or even having any kind of idea here, but just wanted to get the thoughts of two smart people about what they think my team might do this weekend. So why don't you start on this one, Duck?
So there's a couple of different things that I really want to find out first for Nebraska. So Dylan Raiola is potentially going to miss the game. They're working in the second and third team quarterback to prepare all three players potentially to play. Raiola was scheduled to try to practice yesterday and today, so we'll see how that goes, but I would really want to know if he's available. Also, out of Nebraska camp, they just hired West Virginia Dana to run the offense. Dana Holgerson is going to Nebraska, and they promoted him from some sort of special associate to now offensive coordinator and play caller. I think that they'll have something dialed up that'll be unique that we
Wow.
haven't seen.
Not heard that. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And it's really gut check time, right? I think this is one of those motifs, if you will, for Nebraska is that they find ways to lose games. They stub their toe in close games. They can't quite put a full season together. And whatever way you split the pins, this team has to be fighting tooth and nail with high motivation to get to a bowl game, which they have not done since 2016. I think from a motivational and from a focus standpoint, off the bye, Nebraska will be really locked in. Now, Nebraska does have a very solid defensive line, and 3 of the last 5 opponents Nebraska has played, including Ohio State, have rushed for under 100 yards. So I think the ground game for USC, they may find it difficult to really gash, and so that's going to require Mayava to be in passing situations quite a bit. Now, can the offensive line hold up? I'm not so sure that it's going to be smooth sailing. They still may have success, but I don't know that it'll be smooth sailing for USC against the front seven of Nebraska, which I happen to think is actually pretty good. Now, Nebraska's bugaboo for years has been turnovers, fourth down stops, not converting field goals. They've just had so many different problems that has just reared their ugly head from poor coach teams. Now, Matt Rule has done a little bit better with that, but really tough to say. I'm inclined to play Nebraska, but I have to know who's starting at quarterback. I'm also inclined on the under. I think that both of these teams are just going to find themselves in a defensive battle. USC's offense is certainly not what it was the last several years, and their defense is actually much more improved despite their game against who was it recently where they I guess Penn State scored quite a few on them, but the defense is actually pretty well improved compared to years past. They're no longer the
Yep.
lead gas can defense that we've seen from them in the past. So I lean under in a game that could be both teams want to run the ball. Nebraska runs it 60% of the time, and USC obviously has made a much more concerted effort this year in running the football as well. Might be a little rust with the new quarterback, maybe a little bit of kinks to work out with him being off the bench and simulating a live game action is tough to do. So I'd be inclined to take the under in this matchup. But if Raiola is a full go, I really lean Nebraska to keep this closer than a one-score game.
Very fair analysis. The one thing I would push back on a little about the under, we don't know how much. I'll put it this way: if I was looking at the under, I would be concerned about a guy with a completely different skill set at quarterback than Miller Moss has, and a lot of those things where he basically just had to hand the ball off. Riley loves that zone read, or just is like, crap. Okay, I'll take my 4 yards here. That becomes totally different, and I'm just curious to say that would be the one thing I'd be concerned about in terms of an underplay there. That could just get away from it. As much as I really respect the Nebraska defense and Matt Rule. And Robert, I will throw this to you. Duck mentions that Nebraska is still finding ways to lose. Um, Guess what? USC has really tried to grab that market by the horns too, as well this season. They've led in every game in the fourth quarter this season. Maybe start with that. Is this one where USC can finally hang on, or are they going to find a way again
I mean, that's
to
the
lose?
thing, right? Yeah, I think if you're looking at who's underperforming more this year, I think that kind of goes to Nebraska, I'd say. Again, USC has not been particularly impressive, but at the same time, as you mentioned, they've led in every fourth quarter in all those games they've lost, right? The Michigan game, I think it was Minnesota as
Minnesota,
well, I think. Yeah,
Maryland,
Maryland.
Penn
Yeah,
State, Washington. Thank you. It's been an awesome season.
they looked good in all those games, but Nebraska has really struggled against somewhat inferior opponents in a lot of these games. And I think that if you're Lincoln Riley and you're making that quarterback change, it's because you're saying like, all right, I need a quarterback. I need a quarterback that could do something. That clearly they're not getting that push that they need in that fourth quarter. Again, if you're scoring an extra touchdown or two somewhere, if you're completing one of those drives, converting a field goal to a touchdown, they win a couple of those games, right? I think that's what the push is here. And again, I don't think USC is fundamentally broken, especially not when you're looking good for 90% of the game and then the last little part you're struggling with. Nebraska on offense has been really rough last couple of weeks. They looked really good at the beginning. Couldn't do a ton against Colorado there in that game. They did win that game handily, but that was the first sign that you guys should have probably been able to put up more than 28 against Colorado, and then they've just gone downhill since that game. And I think in that case, yeah, my model really clearly likes USC here, but there's nothing. I don't think I have Jaden Alvea in as the quarterback there for the start because I just have Miller Moss. But the fact that I have Miller Moss and I have it as such a big favorite means that I think USC can roll here.
Wow, and they're very different at home than on the road too. They're one of those. I don't know if they've won a road game this year. I don't think they have. Now that I think about it, no.
If I
The
can
only win
add to
was please.
part of the reason for the Nebraska offensive coordinator switch is that the team has just been really tired of extremely conservative play calling nature in the second half of games. They've actually scored a ton of first half points in the first several games of the season, and they found themselves scoring 7, 3, 10 in the second halves, 0 against Colorado, and just completely shutting it down offensively. And so I think that's part of the reason which sparked the change with the offensive coordinator as well is they were just tired of an extremely conservative play calling nature in the second half of games.
Yeah, I forgot that was Satterfield. Marcus Satterfield was the OC there. I had no idea that Dana was on staff. Not that I know these guys intimately, but just from afar. Dana Holgerson doesn't really strike me as an awesome personality fit with Matt Rule. They don't look like they'd probably do the same thing on like a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. I'll just put it that way. That's an interesting fit. We'll see how long that lasts. All right, next game. This one, unfortunately, Robert's model put the kibosh on it. I've been very bullish on San Jose State now. This is one of those weird things where the proof of concept isn't, maybe you can say it's not there because they've been more of a strong defensive team. This has basically gotten them through a lot of their games. It's really just been the offense or the defense. The offense has been good. It's been better than expected for year one for the spread and shred. And like I mentioned in the week 11 review, or week 12 preview, San Jose State actually has two top 10 receivers. If I'm looking by receiving explosiveness, Nick Nash, who was like a known quantity coming into the season, then I forget the other name. You probably know this, Doc. Do you know that off the top of your head who their other stud receiver is at San Jose State?
Um, yeah, Justin Lockhart.
Yep, that's it. And he's like top five. So it's working well. And I still don't think that this is like an awesome quarterback they have. Now, maybe he's improved, but he was shaky plus in the beginning of the season. San Jose State does not run the ball, but that's not really what they do. They do have this explosive passing offense, like I just said. I look at this at most angles. They absolutely have a better pass defense in Boise, and that's not even close. I'm going to say they have a better run defense because this Boise run defense number here is polluted by a bunch of sacks. They're basically we're either going to sack you and drive you back 10 yards and make it 2nd and 19, or we're going to give up a huge pass play. And there's no in between there on the defense, which explains why they are actually literally a below average overall defense. And as somebody who was over over Boise 9.5 wins, this defense scares me. It scares me a bit in this spot too. We both have San Jose State covering at least here. I don't know if they're going to win straight up, but again, if I was going to stray from the gospel of dual model, this is another one where I'd take a long look at San Jose State. Robert, what do you think about this? Are you in line? You don't have the margin with your model, but you believe in San Jose State in this spot to cover at least two scores?
I technically don't on paper have the margin because I just have it as 8, which is very close to the one where I'm off. This is 1 point away
Yeah.
from being a dual model play, and that feels almost insignificant, especially when you're dealing with 14. What I will say though is that I think I actually do this as a play, and I think I actually might play this. I think we had a very good call last week on Nevada against Boise State, and that one was just like where I we just had it as like, where did this play come from? No one saw it coming a mile away. I never would have thought in a million years that we both would have been playing Nevada last week against Boise State.
Yeah.
And yet that was apparently perfect because I think we both actually had them losing by about a score, I think.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the score was, basically. And now fast forward a week and we're right back here. And we're again trying to fade Boise State. And if the model keeps trying, actually not just the model, both models, if both models keep trying to tell us something, we should listen here. And I think the model is saying, hey guys, Boise State might not be the best G5 team here. Boise State might have some problems here. And I think that there's a lot that goes into those Boise State lines. I think there's obviously some Heisman hype for Austin GT and all that stuff. But look, you have them as a pretty poor defense, and they're a good offense, but their defense is pretty bad. And if you can't stop the other team from scoring on you, they're just going to keep scoring on you, right? It gets them back in the games, and it really stops those massive blowouts, especially against better teams. No, I don't hate a San Jose State play here. Do I think they're going to win the game? San Jose State probably not win, but could they cover a 14? Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, one other thing that you didn't mention, in addition to having against basically the market and saying, yeah, this is going to be a close game on Nevada, both our models actually had San Jose State straight up as dogs at Oregon State
Yeah.
as well. So this might be where our models are just a little more finely tuned than the market here. I think also you were going somewhere with this. We've talked about in usually the review episodes, or no, it's a preview when I'm doing the power ratings. Your model doesn't like unbalanced teams exactly like this, where basically everything's all happening on one side of the ball. So I think that's why you're a little more in tune when Boise, your model is more in tune where they're vulnerable and just mine just says, okay, mine just looks at basically these and adjusts for venue. And it says this is a really good offense, but this is not elite. You need to be basically like South Carolina defense level of great to break into the top 20. And I don't have that here. I just don't have enough on one side of the ball. So I think you've got that interplay between not exceptional enough on one side of the ball and on your, as far as your model concerned, is just not that good at all. Yeah. So 2 votes for that. Now, Duck, you going to tell us we're wrong and Boise's the play here?
No, not specifically. Now, I do think that San Jose State's front seven is not going to provide as much resistance as you'd like in this situation, not nearly as much resistance as what you would need to try to necessitate a straight up win. I think that Boise will be able to run the football and likely play action off of it and should be able to have some success moving it through the air as well. I also believe that, like you had mentioned, the Boise defense is susceptible through the air, and I think that San Jose State's receivers are going to get open and make plays. Now, Emmett Brown started much of the way, and they've made a switch to Walker Eget, and so he is the guy now who's taking the snaps for Jose. But really, the interesting thing philosophically here is San Jose State went on the road and beat Oregon State, and that was their 6th win. So they're a bowl team now. The pressure's off, right? It's you have exceeded expectations in year 1 under Ken Niumatalolo. You have achieved bowl eligibility status. The next 3 are go out and sling it and see what happens, right? Boise State at home, UNLV at home, Power 5 Stanford at home. This is one of those where it's like you play loose, you let it all hang out like they did at Washington State in week 4 where they lost a 52-54 type game. And I could see San Jose State being very pesky here. I like the over, and I took over 61. I actually did make a play on that because I can see this being one of those situations where it's like Boise State's game against Georgia Southern, where it's an 18-point margin to 11 to 4 back to 11. It's like one of those back and forth games where there's very little stops being had. And I could certainly see San Jose State, for their last 5, they've gone for 450 yards on offense. Although the point totals have not been huge, they're going to move the football a ton here. I can firmly say that I believe that we'll see a lot of yards from San Jose State. They should be able to score points, and certainly would think that each team can be in the 30s here. So I would say Boise State, again, will likely win the game, probably by 8 to 10, but I would pick San Jose State against the number, especially at 14, and I like over the total here.
Nice. I don't know. Maybe this is a new rule, informal. If it's not a dual model play, but if the 3 of us still like the side that was almost a dual model play. All right. This is the first of those to track. Appreciate the info. I don't get in the box scores enough to know things like the San Jose State quarterback change. I'm going to check that. I want to see the splits before and after. Because like I said, Brown seemed to be holding them back at times when I had seen them on TV, back when they were on TV more often. Speaking of TV, I think this one's on True TV, if I remember correctly. It's on one of those kind of off-brand channels. A little warm-up for the playoff. This would be, were it not for Jamie Chadwell, this would be the closer. This would be the closer game for the dream season of under 2.5 wins. Unfortunately, Liberty did not do their part. So this is just another step towards, I guess, a 1-win Kennesaw State season. Kennesaw, like I mentioned a few times, they've shown some relative competence on the defense side of the ball, but my God, this offense is just New Mexico State level bad. There's just, I, honestly, I look at this Apex and I look just at no ground game. I don't even know how they're even this high in terms of an offensive power rating. It's grim when they have the ball. I like Robert's model here. This seems, number one, it's saying don't watch this game unless you also like snuff films. But 39 Apex and 11 G Gap sounds about right because this is a good Sam Houston defense here. I just, our models absolutely, I think, are right on this number here. Basically, one score for Kennesaw, and just it's a matter of Robert's got margin here. I don't, because I need a little more here. I think this is because I'm probably just, I've got relative competence in terms of the Kennesaw State defense here. But, this 13, if I just take a step back from my model and I just look at big picture about how I just gauge these two teams by talent alone, this 13 looks just short. It's probably moved since then. Let me just look that up real quick as I go to Conference USA lineup on ESPN Bet, which is probably going to be off by a point and a half. It's 15 now. That again, that's still, this seems, I'll put it this way. And maybe I'll throw it to you on this, Duck. If you said, here's $100, bet it on Kennesaw State, but how many points do you need? I'm needing at least 21 and a half. That's the number I'll start with. So just let me know. Am I way off? Am I that much different from the market? Am I just believing my model too much? I just made that number off on the fly. Didn't even look at that's basically what my model has here. But does that feel more like a good number to you than the market of 15?
Yeah, I'd want 24 and a half on Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State's in turmoil. The administration fired their head coach, the only head coach they've had in program history this week. The boosters and the administration and the players were really upset about it, didn't understand why he was terminated in the midst of a tough season. Almost like the team moved up to FBS from FCS without having the proper protocols in place and the proper planning to have a formidable roster. And so it's really disappointing there. Now, we have seen teams rally the troops around the interim and play their best football that very first game before fading late or fading the rest of the way. I don't really see that playing out here. So, Kennesaw State has had a couple of chances to win some games against UTEP and Middle Tennessee State, and they couldn't get the job done. I don't see them getting a win the rest of the way. But the way they blew that UTEP game
Oh my God. Yeah.
was unbearable. How do you get off the mat from that? That was really their one additional chance to get a win. Now, Sam
Yeah.
Houston is still very much alive for Conference USA race, and I actually took some Sam Houston plus 1100 to win Conference USA, as I think there's a great chance that this team is the second best team in the league. And so they have had some issues offensively because their quarterback, Hunter Watson, has been out with injury. And our friend Jace Bauer from the MAC, who cannot throw the football, has been in there. And so they've really struggled to move the ball. But I think this is a chance for Sam Houston to really right the ship and get the sails in the right direction here. I would anticipate that their run offense is able to really wreak havoc against Kennesaw State's tiring defense. This late in the season, when you're giving up 450 yards to UTEP and to Western Kentucky, I guess is understandable, but you're giving up so many yards and so many chances to score. Even the Liberty game was really fluky, where Liberty had several chances inside the 30-yard line and ended up with 0 points. The concern that I do have in this situation is that Sam Houston's red zone offense has been quite poor the last 3 weeks, and they cannot kick field goals. If you go back and look at the box scores, it's been atrocious, and it's cost me 2 covers in games against FIU and Louisiana Tech because their field goal operation is a disaster. And so if they're up by 13 and they have to extend the margin, they have to punch it in because they cannot kick field goals. So that would be my only pause, is really bad special teams operations from Sam Houston. But I believe their offense should really get it right here against Kennesaw State. Again, they don't have a full FBS roster. The talent is not FBS talent. And this is going to be one of the stronger teams that they will have played in Conference USA. They're a really physical team in Sam Houston. I can't imagine that the offense is going to have nearly the success that they had against UTEP or Liberty here. I would lay it with Sam Houston. I would need 24.5 to want to back the Owls given the circumstances around their program right now.
I can't underestimate or understate enough what you say about losing that UTEP game. UTEP has just had a way of just they're not a well coached team, especially in the fourth quarter. And UTEP actually had a 92% post game win expectancy, and that's they just it shouldn't have been that close. And you lose that one, that is so deflating. And then the coach is fired after that, a game that you just completely outplayed the opponent and just a fluky whatever. It's hard to see you rallying, getting up off the mat from that. Good points on that, Robert. I guess I'll start with this. This to me looks like a pretty good Big Ten opponent against a poor MAC team. Is it as simple as okay, Kennesaw State's not getting in double digits, and just how many can put Sam Houston put up on the board, and do they need Kennesaw State just to roll over at some point?
Yeah, Sam Houston's actually pretty good. They're not horrible. I think they could probably put up at least as many, if not more, points than UTEP, and their defense is probably better than UTEP. And I think that's the entire ball game right there. That's 13. You adjust that. That's all that it is, right? I think there's that. I will say that actually I do like the play of Sam Houston to win Conference USA. Next week, I think they play Jacksonville State. If they beat them, and they beat Liberty the final week, then they'll be back in the conference championship game, and they'll get a rematch with Western Kentucky, which they barely lost to the first time. It's currently in my book at +7 on Bet365 at least. It's +750, but a very attainable goal for them. I think. I think they could win Conference USA. I think Kennesaw State they had their shot last week. I think. And then they fired their coach. I think one thing I will say about the coaching fire is the fact that he knew what this team was. He built this team. He had been the head coach of this team for several years. Clearly, it was not ready for FBS, but that doesn't mean that whoever's the next in line behind him knew how to make this an FBS team either. I think that guy was your best shot at being competitive, and you fired him now. So who's behind him calling plays? If this team was not an FBS team, then what do we think that the guy behind that guy was like an FBS coach? Like, I don't think that's how that works. So yeah, I'm not really worried about picking Sam Houston here.
And the other thing too is it's the only head coach the program has ever had. It's the only leader they've ever had. So
Yeah, and they had success at one point in FCS, right? Haven't they?
Yeah, they went to
they were a
the
formidable
playoff a couple times.
FCS program.
Yeah, which is weird. Yeah, he put the team together, but it's just weird to fire him now when, look, was I ahead of the market a little bit on how bad they'd be? Yeah, but basically he's not a season like this was not unforeseen. It just doesn't make any sense to fire him now. It's just it doesn't this is he's playing as was expected. You're gonna fire somebody for that?
Well, like
Okay.
what was the expectation? The season win
Yeah.
total was 2.5 wins. Did you expect him to be competing for a bowl right now? I don't understand what's the
Yeah.
expectation here.
And let me just ask you this then, either of you. Do you think that anybody involved in that decision has any understanding about that, how meaningful it is, literally, I'm not joking around, that they didn't get New Mexico State? That could change the whole narrative. I'm being serious. That's an eminently winnable game. I think Kennesaw State would actually beat them. New Mexico State is just horrible on both sides of the ball. There's something here on defense, at least. And just, I guarantee you, the people that made the decision, nobody really understands exactly what Conference USA is. So, I don't know. No shortage of really ill-informed people making big decisions. That's how the world works.
One other
Even
point I
at the
want to
Sharpest
make.
Football Podcast. Oh, yeah,
I do want to make one other
please.
point. So Sam Houston in their last two victories before the bye, they beat FIU 10-7 and they beat Louisiana Tech 9-3. Each of those games
Mm-hmm.
saw goal-to-go situations where Sam Houston had first and goal in each game, three separate drives, which resulted in 0 points due to being stopped on downs or missed field goals. I have to assume that is something that KC Keeler was adamant about focusing on during the bye week. They're going to punch it in this week. They're not going to settle for field goals. They are going to get in the end zone time and time again.
It's funny. It's like they fixed most of the offensive problems we saw when they were just comedically bad last season, except in that one little part of the field. Yeah, still those last 7 yards are still just not negotiable.
Yeah.
All right, last game here. I've got two teams where I think I'm just going to start with this. I threw this out there a few weeks ago. I've seen like surprisingly functional signs from Charlotte. I think they got wiped up with a few times earlier in the season, and I know their one loss record isn't great. For the American Conference, these numbers are not that bad. These are your average American Conference, and guess what? They're better than South Florida in both of these metrics too. I This is one of those things that defies logic, or basically even like common and good fan knowledge here. Apex is the same between these two offenses. That's interesting. The running game's about the same in terms of effectiveness. Charlotte with the more explosive passing offense here. Charlotte with, and this is not great, but with the better pass defense here. Neither of them can stop the run. Charlotte even more. I've just seen so many little signs from my model saying Charlotte's not as bad as everybody thinks. Now this is 3.5 is not a huge margin here, but my model's got them winning by 9. Robert has this basically a tie game for all intents and purposes. At first glance, if you just look up here, it's this team sucks. This is a big improvement from last year. Let's not forget just how bad they were last year. They were really bad. They were just really incompetent. And I think that they're approaching competence without a lot of people noticing. My model seems to be ahead of these kind of stories. I'm not betting it. Obviously, it's not a dual model play, but I just find Charlotte an interesting team this way. I think, Duck, you and I have talked about Charlotte before. Are you seeing like signs of near competence from the 49ers?
Yeah, and even in their last couple of losses, they were really competitive at half with Tulane and Memphis, and they were right there, just a couple plays either way, one way or another, away from being much more competitive in these situations. But this is all about South Florida, right? If you look at South Florida, even during the scope of their season, their quarterback, Byron Brown, hasn't played all season after the about third game of the way. And the offensive dynamic is just super sluggish, right? Like they've outside of that second half against FAU a couple weeks ago, they have just operated in slow motion a lot, and it's really been tough to watch. If you just want to focus on the win and loss record, look at the teams that South Florida has been victorious against. They beat Bethune-Cookman, Southern Miss, who's a train wreck,
Oh my God.
and then
Yeah.
UAB and FAU, and all of those teams have either quit, mailed it in, or the defenses are just so porous. And so I think you're in a situation where Charlotte here really needed to get into the bye week, and in fact, it's almost a double bye situation as they haven't played a game since Halloween night, so they haven't played a game in the month of November yet. So you almost have a
Wow.
double bye here for Charlotte to get healthy, to get some things worked out here, and with what they have left on their schedule, if I'm the 49ers, I'm thinking we rally the troops here for 3 games and we get to a bowl game. USF at FAU and UAB, there's not any one of those 3 teams that they can't win. And so I think there's an extreme motivation here. I think Biff is coaching for his job. They really have to start to get some traction going into the offseason. They really need the 15 additional bowl practices. Excuse me. And this is a situation here where I think that Charlotte can really show some significant improvement this week at home. I like the 49ers plus 3.5, and I would take them on the money line.
Interesting. Robert, you've got this basically a tie game. This might not be one you feel strongly about, other than just like you might remember about a month ago, I pointed out the awesome wardrobe choice of Biff Poggi. Do we start there on this one?
Maybe it's this one is interesting. Your model is a lot more bullish on Charlotte here. My model is not bullish, if that makes sense. However, I do think though that our models are, and again, mine is not adjusted for home field advantage, so that could potentially play into it as well. What I will say though is that our models are both saying the same thing about South Florida. It's been a couple of weeks now that the models said South Florida's not that good, and then
Yeah,
we
true.
bet
Yeah.
we bet against South Florida, and then they decided to destroy FAU. So that was great, but they didn't look amazing doing it for a while there. No, did USF play
They played
last?
FAU. I think that was like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, they just
Yeah,
lost
it was
it.
2 weeks ago.
They did nothing against Navy, and that's what's concerning. Is Navy's not a great defensive team, and they got, I think, 3 points last week.
Yeah. No, the model is pointing out that South Florida isn't that good, and then they did pull away against FAU, but again, they haven't done much since, and even then, they got a bit lucky late in that game to get that number to where it was. So no, I'm on board with the fate of South Florida here. We're not necessarily Biff Poggi fans, but I think South Florida and I think their quarterback is just not particularly good this year. And they made some improvements year over year, obviously, but this is just it's not that good of a team. So I do Charlotte here as well.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing too, this is just really interesting, and I don't know, uh, Duck, since you're closer to the market than just the two just model nerds here. South Florida being a field goal favorite on the road, do you think that the market is more out of tune with how there's all relative terms in the American? Are they? Do you think the market's too high on what on South Florida versus what they really are, or do you think they're too low on Charlotte, or both? Is there one narrative you think that the market's more wrong on here in terms of the teams?
Yeah, I think that the market could suspect that national TV game a couple Fridays ago with
Uh,
FAU, where they scored
FAU.
37 points in the second half and blasted
Yeah.
Florida Atlantic on national TV, holds some weight, along with you had the Tom Herman, Alex Golish handshake that went bad, and there was a little skirmish there. And then, I don't know, the Navy performance was just so weak on offense. They couldn't hardly get a first down and really struggled to move the ball with any real consistency. But maybe there's a lot more respect for Navy than maybe what Navy should even get. But Charlotte, maybe they're just being a little bit forgotten, right? They haven't played a game in what will amass to
Yeah,
17 days.
true.
And the last time they played, they got blown out by Tulane on Halloween. But this team has had some pretty competitive performances, and even the Tulane game was fairly competitive before it got away from them in the fourth quarter. There's no arguing. Tulane, I think, is the best team in the conference, and Tulane will quite
Uh,
certainly win the American.
I'll push back on that. I think Army's the best. I would love to see Army versus Tulane. Army is secretly really good on defense. Tulane is explicitly good at almost everything. I've seen all kinds of positive spots. You know what? Let's just end on this right now. I don't even have my model here, but each of you, we'll start with you, Robert, just to make you uncomfortable because you're fighting your South Pacific virus here. Neutral site for the American Conference title game, Army versus Tulane. What do you think the line would be?
Looking at the books, Tulane is a narrow favorite, so I'd assume it's probably going to be like Tulane minus 3.5. But at that number, I'd probably take Army, depending on how Army looks the next couple of weeks. They looked really rough last week, but we don't know. They didn't throw the ball at all, barely. They only threw the ball four
No,
times. Whether or not that was
exactly.
by design or if his shoulder is hurt, but then to be fair, he ran a bunch of times. So if your shoulder's hurt, I don't think you just run your quarterback a bunch. We'll see. Let's see how they do in 2 weeks against Notre Dame. But I think yeah, a line of 3.5, and then works, and then in that case I'd probably take Army.
What do you think, Duck? Yeah, first of all, what do you think the line is, and then let's start with that. If it's those two teams on a neutral site,
It'll actually be at Army because Army will assuredly go undefeated in conference play and host the game. My numbers have Tulane
okay.
minus 6.5.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
really?
And I'm not saying that's what the line should be, but that's what I would have it power rated as on the road would be Tulane minus 6.5. And it's just one of those things where Army has played some of the lesser teams in the league, right? They played
Absolutely.
FAU, Rice, Temple, Tulsa, UAB, East Carolina when East Carolina was not peaking after before they had made their quarterback switch. And then they beat North Texas last week, and then they'll play UTSA, who's down. So they've had a really weak American schedule, and yeah, it's really hard for me to and I've been on Army more than anybody. I backed them week in and week out and really rode the gravy train here, but we'll really find out a lot about this team next week when they play Notre Dame and then in the American Conference Championship game because they're likely to host Tulane there. Shouldn't be
Let
that
me
much
ask.
of a surprise though, because Tulane is on the road this week against Navy and is laying 6.5. I think Navy and Army are of a similar comp composition. I
Ooh,
think Navy
I
has.
disagree there. I disagree there. And
Yeah.
let me just tell you why. And I'm going to take a note because I am 55 years old and I forget a bunch of stuff here. This is when you were going through their games and they haven't played great opponents. I will push back a little bit and say they played an exceptional offense in North Texas. North Texas is a legit plus offense. And North Texas did him some favors by throwing 2 end zone interceptions, but that doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can have an off day, but an off day is a lot of times a function of your opponent. And I have Army's defense is just legit. Now, I don't perfectly adjust for strength of opponent, but nobody does. I think I do a pretty good job, and I have Army as a really good defense. Having said that, then I'm curious, going back to if Robert's line is correct, and that sounds fair to me. Say that Tulane's giving 3.5 at famed, is it Mikey? Is it Mitchie? I forget how it's
Mikey.
pronounced. Mikey Stadium. Does that mean that you would be on Tulane if you've got a field goal margin there between your numbers, which are, I think, more precise than our models, and the line there, if it's 3.5?
Let's put it this way. I took some Army plus 450 and 550 to win the conference about 5 weeks
Mm-hmm.
ago, and I took Tulane plus 105 last week before the games played out. If it's Army against Tulane, I'll be very happy either way.
Oh,
But if it was 3, I would take Tulane. If it was closer to 6.5, like I have it, I would take Army.
okay. And what you said there just blows our minds because we only deal in big margins. And when you guys talk about like field goals, swinging plays, I get nervous right now. I feel skittish. My palms are sweaty. I'm nervous and I can't speak well. Good conversation to wrap it up, though. I like that. Everyone, that does it for this week. Thank you so much. I am just amazed by the number of views and listens that we get. This is the smartest of the smart of a smart podcast. So, congratulations if you made it this far. You are very much worthy of the sharpest moniker, if you will. Robert, Duck, we will see you next week. Good luck on this week's plays. And until then, see you both.